It's about to start. And we just want to let everyone know that this is actually being live streamed on YouTube. So no pressure to anyone, but just be aware, cameras on. Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, can you all hear me? You're very, very welcome this afternoon to this discussion of compassion and connectivity. It is a challenging and I think very, very interesting subject, and we have with us a scintillating panel to get the discussion going, and we look forward to your own contributions in due course. My name is David Donoghue. I'll be moderating the discussion. I was the Irish ambassador to the UN a couple of years ago, and I chaired the SDG negotiations and a couple of other things. Let me begin with that. In adopting the SDGs 5 years ago, world leaders declared that the spread of technology and ever greater global interconnectedness and interconnectivity creates enormous potential for human progress. But at the same time, they declared that a priority had to be to address the needs of the poorest and the most vulnerable in the world as these new developments came along. So in a way, that gives us a good starting point for the discussion. We're talking about vulnerability of all kinds. It can be migrants and refugees. It can be the poorest people on earth. It can be homelessness. It can be disability. Vulnerability can express itself in many different ways. So I would like to put a general opening question to the panel members. I'll first introduce them briefly. Mark Roden is the Chief Executive of DING. Simon Mulcahy is the Chief Innovation Officer, Simon, with Salesforce. Mandeep Rai has just completed a book called let me get it, The Value Compass. Sounds intriguing, and it sounds terrific from what I've just heard of it. Moving on, Bani Dugal. It sounds like an Irish or a Scottish name, but Bani Dugal is the principal representative of the Baha community at the United Nations in New York. And Debra Barraud is the founder of Humans of Amsterdam, about which she will tell us. And then finally, Cyrus Hodes, who is with FoundersX, well, you can describe your various activities, Cyrus. So I'm delighted that we have this panel to open up on the topic, which is really of great interest for us all. And the question really that I would throw out to each of them is, how can we ensure that that technology and connectivity can be harnessed in support of the needs of the vulnerable groups in our world and of people living in emerging digital economies? That's a broad canvas, but I would just ask each of you in turn to introduce yourselves and tell us how you relate to that topic. Simon, I'll begin with you.
Well, David, first of all, thank you very much, and thank you all for being here. So Salesforce, a technology company, in broad brush statement, we're basically helping companies move from having a product in the center to having a customer in the center. What that means is that most organizations, especially even technology companies, are effectively have this in mindset of, I've got this product, how do I sell it? If you imagine flipping the binoculars and saying, I want to put the customer in the middle, you want to put a person in the middle. Once you start to do that, you start to look at the world in a fundamentally different way. You start to think about the needs of those individuals, what their cares are. And then you kind of have to redesign your business in the context of now that understanding. So that's kind of, imagine we've got some technology that does that. When you then apply that to the universe, what happens? Well, Salesforce was born 21 years ago to solve this problem. And when we were born, 1% of our time, equity, and product was effectively dedicated to giving back. What that means is there's 7 days of every employee in the company, and hundreds of millions of dollars are then kind of channeled into giving back. And we focus that as a technology company around education, and the SDGs around the environment, in particular oceans and trees. And for us, in that context, that giving back context, education is critical because it's kind of like the level playing field. It's the only single most powerful way of leveling the playing field. And if we can, for free, allow people to have access to better education, then people who are in vulnerable places or in disadvantaged places can have access to the best education. And they can access the trillion-dollar economy, which is this new technology opportunity. You have to go to trailhead.com. It's free. You can then begin that journey. Anybody who has access to technology. So that's kind of one way we look at it. The other way we look at this question is, how do we help many individual organizations who are trying to solve the problem of helping many people in different types of vulnerable situations, be they in the developed world or the developing world, and not necessarily provide them with the access to the technology, but provide governments like the Australian government with the ability to help homeless people. So one of the worst challenges for homeless people is they have to find help, and they kind of have to knock on doors and they get turned away. They're telling their story thousands and thousands of times. How do we help the Australian government effectively find a single way where you can tell your story once as a homeless person in, say, Sydney, and you never have to tell that story again. You have an identity, and now you have the whole government who can then, you become present. Well, that same technology can then be applied to enabling helplines serve people in distress. That could be they're being, mistreated at home. It could be that they're homeless. It could be for any number of really quite terrible societal reasons. It could be that they can phone up numbers or they can text If they phone up, then we can use AI and natural language processing to understand their level of need and concern, and we can then help organizations direct services to them based on their need. This saves lives. So there's capabilities that we work with companies to help them bring that to life. So there's some examples, but we look at the world through kind of a framework. And when you look at the world and you try and put the customer in the middle, you can't just apply technology to try and solve society's problems by just digitizing everything. We have to look at making things better. And for us, that means we've got to look at effectively creating transparency, empowerment, and personalized engagements. And these are much, much different kind of ethical frameworks.
Thanks so much, Simon. I'll turn now to Mark.
Thank you, David. I suppose when I think of technology and connectivity, technology for me is all about the mobile phone, and it has been for 20 years. And when I think of connectivity, I think of people, behind every mobile phone there is a person. There's no doubt that the advent of technology has, brought forward from the days of Negroponte talking about one laptop per child as being a goal to provide that ubiquity of access to technology, which has been overtaken by technology, so much so that the actual owning of a mobile phone or access to a mobile phone is no longer something which is an aspirational goal. It's a reality. Where the challenge comes in is more around powering the mobile phone in terms of credit regularly, consistently. We work in terms of Ding. We are a for-profit company that enables people living and working abroad to instantly transfer value to the mobile phone of friends and family back home in 3 seconds. Why? Because instantly then you enable that person to be connected. And it's an extraordinary statistic that half the world's population, of which there are about 4 billion people, of which there is almost all of them are prepaid mobile phones. At any one time during a month, 70% of those mobile phones will have no credit. That means the person cannot be contacted. That means that the family, which is separated, which is the tragedy of migration, in my view, means that reassurance which people get once they are able to speak to somebody back home is restored. But if it's broken, it's something which can't be solved by Facebook, WhatsApp, or Skype if you're outside of Wi-Fi. And yes, people talk about the ubiquity of Wi-Fi, but the reality is very different. So in some ways, we see the mobile phone as being something to, just like Simon spoke, very eloquently about the importance of the customer at the center of technology, or at the center of their business. I would say, you add to that and say, I'd put the person, the human, at the center of everything that we do.
Thanks very much, Mark. Bani, would you respond to the idea?
Sure, thank you very much. So to answer your question, I just want to talk about Simon had mentioned the homeless and other vulnerable groups. Technology which is designed by one group of individuals in one part of the world can very much reflect the values and cultural norms of that segment of society. And this can have unintended consequences on another part of the world. And I think it's these populations that must have a say in how this technology is likely to impact their lives and what their needs are, rather than have somebody plan for them. And then they have to adjust their cultural sensibilities to adjust to the new technology. So this in itself creates, it reinforces some of the challenges that are being faced by vulnerable populations. For example, technology also amplifies inequalities between women and men. And at first glance, one wouldn't think that, because it might seem like digital platforms could empower women, increasing their access to education and banking and health services. However, a recent study has shown that men's dominance in the IT industry and biotech is reversing the trend toward equality, because technology designed by men is likely to project their thinking and their needs. And so it's something for us to think about in light of the user and who's producing the technology.
Thank you very much, Bani. Debra, would you like to offer your thoughts?
I run a platform called Humans of Amsterdam, and Humans of Amsterdam is a platform with over 600,000 followers worldwide. Basically, what I do, I walk the streets of Amsterdam with my camera, and I approach strangers and I ask them about their story, and I ask them about their personal stories. And so for me personally, technology has allowed me to create a platform to give a voice to those who don't have a voice, and to shine light on very ordinary people in their daily lives. But over the years, I managed to use my platform as well for different communities worldwide as well. And one of the examples that I would like to give, how I use technology in order to have stories heard, to have stories out there that are usually not heard, is, for example, this is like 3 years ago, no, even more, 4 years ago. I was walking on the street and I met this woman, and her name was Judith. And Judith was outside of a big store, and she had like these bags full of coats. And it was around the time that we had a big refugee crisis in Europe. And she basically, what she started doing was posting online that she was raising money for refugees, because a lot of refugees in the Netherlands didn't have a good winter coat. So I got in contact with her, and I told her about my platform, and I say, I have this platform, and I would actually love to share your story. And so I took her picture and I published it online, and the community that I have actually responded to that and was like, you know what, we also want to donate, we also want to contribute. So we managed to open up a fundraiser through my platform, and I believe within 48 hours we raised around 10,000 euros to buy coats. And I think this is a very practical, maybe, and a very simple example, but I do think that technology helps people that have great initiatives to support them, and also to reach a wider audience. And it's interesting to me that someone in Australia would decide to donate to someone that fled from Syria to the Netherlands in order that this person can have a warm winter. So that's actually the example that I wanted to give.
Thanks very much. I must say it's a fascinating example, and just shows the immense potential of the new technologies to produce kind of instant support for groups who are really under pressure. And I think that it's quite inspiring what you said. Cyrus, can I come to you?
Sure. Thanks, David. So okay, I'm a partner in a venture fund called FoundersX Ventures, but what would be more relevant for this panel is my role pro bono in a nonprofit called the Future Society, which we incubated at the Harvard Kennedy School to bridge the gap between policymakers and emerging tech impacting societies. So I'm focusing on AI, created the AI initiative there, and focusing on the ethical issues and governance issues in general. I'd like to go back to the SDG framework that you mentioned, and thank you for your service for creating this extremely useful framework that we all use now. And as a reminder to everyone, the clock is ticking. We only have 10 years to get this done. My personal take, having been involved in discussions there, is that we cannot solve such complex issues such as climate change and others alone. So we need to augment ourselves, and I think AI is really the solution there. So talking about AI, you have various AI tools that you can use there. So for instance, a couple of years back, we've been looking with IBM Watson on working on extreme weather events and looking at getting all data that have been published on specifically heat waves. That was quite relevant to the UAE where I'm based currently. And on heat waves, no one has gone through all the literature, all the social media posting, everything that's been written there about specifically this given subject. But having machine learning and natural language processing tools, getting into there and trying to find out what solution could be applied with policymakers, there has never been done before. What's even more powerful, if you combine NLP with computer vision, for instance, if you get satellite images and understand better the lay of the land on a given region and combine this with the existing literature and reflection, then you have an even more powerful tool. And again, it's a bit shocking that hasn't been used for the time being by policymakers, but that's something in various fora where I'm involved, whether it's OECD or G20 or others, the reflection is there now. The people are trying to think about it. UN is very hands-on about it, so I'm working very closely with the UN Secretary General Office on a program called Global Data Commons, which is part of AI Commons, how we can use and share data to feed into these AI systems to solve the SDGs, basically. So that's, that's a multi-pronged approach, but it's kind of necessary, I believe, at this stage.
That's terrific, Cyrus. Thank you very, very much. Mandy, I'll come to you now. Tell us about the book which you have which is about to come out, I think.
Yes, it comes out in 2 days here in Davos on the 23rd of December, January even. And it's called The Values Compass. And really, I have to thank you, one, for bringing this subject to the forefront, two, for having such a diverse panel in terms of gender, background, and where we're from in the world. So my background is finance, international development, and I've worked as a foreign correspondent and traveled over 150 countries. And the Values Compass looks at 101 of those countries and has distilled each country into a value, not because any country can be distilled into a value, but simply to highlight the kind of positive values that we have within us, whether it be compassion, generosity, grace, protest, recognition, ambition. We're not putting a moral judgment on it. We're just saying that each of us have a need or a want, or we value different things. This brings me to also our use of technology. Some people really value not being autonomous, not being dependent on another for their use of that technology. Some people really value communication and connectivity. Other people value not to have that communication and connectivity. So it's really important to think not just from what you value, and I do agree that those who are making the products are actually, it's quite a bias, it's quite a skewed bias. And one of the primary ways we can tackle that, and this is why this conversation is so great, is to simply allow the diversity in those makers, there to be diversity right at the very beginning, so that the product is represented by both genders, by people from around the world, and from people of different generations. So for example, if I take you to Madagascar has only recently been kind of infiltrated by the internet. And there was a real backlash initially because they didn't want porn or child porn. They didn't want to have necessarily to know everything that's going on in every other part of the world and for it to be in their hand or for them to be derailed immediately. And in fact, even with young people, on the 1st of January, we are wishing each other well and we're wishing each other values. On the 2nd of January, Australia's burning. On the 3rd of January, it feels like World War III is breaking out. I mean, it's very hard not to be derailed absolutely immediately. And in any given moment, it doesn't matter what you're doing or where you are, you get that information and it affects you. So what the Values Compass does is simply kind of anchor you in your values and what matters most to you. And I think this is what our technology should be doing, anchoring us into what would serve us as individuals and what would matter most to us.
Thank you very much, Mandy. Thanks to everybody for their contributions. In a way, your last comment, Mandy, brings us neatly to another question or kind of related question. So, I mean, the value of compassion, it's a strong value. It implies solidarity with those who are in greatest need, an outreach to them. And I pose this question to everybody really, should that be the single overriding, and maybe not the single, but should it be the dominant motivation for tech companies going forward in terms of their innovation, or does it have a more secondary role? I mean, I'm deliberately putting it in a provocative way. What place does compassion have in the decision making by tech companies in particular over the coming years? I think, for example, of corporate social responsibility, which most companies nowadays in all areas buy into. At the same time, it's understood that companies have a legitimate profit motive based on, it should still be on the basis of sustainability principles. But to what extent, I'm not looking for a mathematical figure, but should compassion be the first thing one thinks of in designing new products? Would anyone like to respond to that?
Should I just go for it quickly because I mentioned the word compassion? I think it's fundamental, but not without, say, empathy or dignity or humanity or all the other values that are important. Because compassion alone almost can feel a little bit righteous. We're giving and we're feeling for you. And again, there's kind of a power imbalance. But actually, if we really think about the other and we're thinking about ourselves, I think it has to work for both, and then it works well. And CSR, corporate social responsibility, I mean, I'm sure we all have seen the word. How much of a difference does it make, or how much of it is tokenism? I'll let you be the judge. But it really, actually, these values, and compassion being one of them, have to be right at the forefront. Not something we write in a CSR report and then gathers dust on the top shelf and something you wheel out when a mistake happens or, you know, when you want to clean up your act. But to your point of putting the customer first, if you put these values first, yours and the others, then it's not something that it's not tokenism, it's where you're starting from. And not just your own values, but all values.
Anyone else, Simon?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the values thing is incredibly important. We always talk about, at Salesforce, talk about values create value. And we, you know, while we're 20 years old, I think over the last 10 years, while we had a kind of a giving back thing from the beginning in our company, over the last few years, it's the intensity of our focus on those values has become ever more important. And frankly, we're in a trust revolution at the moment. I mean, literally the level of the Edelman Trust Barometer, read that, it's scary reading. The fact is there is no trust in this world. And there's no transparency either. And so we do all, doesn't matter, we're all technology companies. Are you using technology? You're a technology company. It's not like we're the two technology bookends here, sorry, one in the middle. We're all technology companies. It's how we all use technology. Technology itself is not good or bad. It's what we do with it. And I think we need to be super thoughtful about that. And we have an ethical framework. We have an Office of Ethical and Humane Use. Why have we got an Office of Ethical and Humane Use? Because our customers, actually more importantly our employees first, came to us really aggressively going, are our customers using our technology ethically? And we're like, great question. How do we even know that? Well, let's create an Office of Ethical and Humane Use and plug it into the big network of those that exist out there. Turns out that was a very, very tiny network. Same with our Office of Equality that we created. We've got to be really thoughtful about these values, and we don't have all the answers. I love that you're creating a guidebook. I'll leave you one thought. As you apply technology, apply it with design thinking. What that means is you start with your end customers or users. I think you're right, the word customer, I don't mean that. It's these people. And what are you designing for? And that means you've got to really understand their needs and design for them.
Thanks, Simon. Yeah. Mark, do you want to go?
Yeah, I mean, you know, for me, compassion is concern for others. It's a fundamental value. But I think, you know, the way Simon expressed it there, if those values weren't mirrored or shared at the very top of the organization, they wouldn't be lived. And I think the crucial thing is that the leadership of a company not just plays tokenism with them, but actually endorses them and makes them a reality. If the CEO doesn't believe it, it's not going to happen. And I think that they're not mutually exclusive. You know, you can have compassion and profit. They can sit beside each other. And indeed, you know, great profits can lead to more compassion as well and into the execution of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think myself, the one has to allow the basis for, one has to create incentives for companies to be commercially active in the area to begin with. But on the other hand, it's a balance, Mark. I think that's sorry, Cyrus.
So on compassion and values in general, I mean, so this is a discussion that is coming to the AI world. So whether you're talking about AI ethics, whether you're talking about regulation, we talk about, you know, European Union coming with a GDPR, which is, you know, set of values to promote fairness, accountability, transparency. Also, these discussions are on the table. So the main question is, how do we embed values into AI system? And so we can have regulation, hard regulation, and soft regulation. Like IEEE is working on soft regulation, on standards, on what we could aim at and try to achieve. But then from a technological point of view, and especially when you talk about, you know, more advanced type of AI, AGI, artificial general intelligence, how do you make sure that, you know, this AI that we're creating will respect our values? And so how do we define our value? This is an extremely difficult question because values can be different from one country to another. But, you know, having set of common values that we can work on is essential. But now it's a question that we're looking at from a technology point of view. So DeepMind is looking at that, OpenAI is looking at that, and other companies that are working on AGI are focusing on that. But that's why we need philosophers, you know, in the discussion on AI. It's not only technologists, because we're touching at the heart of what it is to be human.
Sure. Bani, would you like to?
So I think the conversation that's being had should happen before you know, whichever form of technology is even being conceived of, and it must be in the planning. I think someone else alluded to that, because even the most well-meaning of technologies can have unintentional consequences and further divide communities rather than uniting them, etc. And I believe that, you know, whatever we are doing has this capacity of greater good, but at the end of the day, it's not the technology, but it's the individuals that have to think about and deliberately make a conscious decision to embed the compassion and the values within the framework of you know, whatever technology is being used. And so this conversation needs to happen not only at the level of the scientists and the technology whizzes who are sitting and designing this, but also a conversation that needs to happen at the level of the community to understand better as to how this technology would be put to use and how they can better it. For one example, I mean, if we have all heard of the, or maybe we haven't, but some of us are involved at the level of the UN in issues regarding women, peace, and security. It's been known that women are often the early warning mechanisms in communities when they're sensing trouble and can call the alarm while the men are busy, you know, their egos are warring, and I know I'm really generalizing here. However, there's a study at the United Nations, and people working in women, peace and security issues are looking at the 1325 resolution, which talks of women in peace and security, and the value added. Now, if there was an app developed for women to use in order to call that early warning, it would make such a wonderful difference. So I think we have to think about the application before designing and the downsides of the technology that's being designed.
Yes. Yeah. Could I just go on a little bit from Cyrus's point about artificial intelligence and both the opportunities and the risks that presents? I mean, how are we going to prevent a situation which we will have these dramatic new technologies which in fact end up isolating a larger and larger part of the world. I mean, is it just a question of design of the new technology, or is it resources to enable the most underprivileged parts of the world to take part in it? I mean, I don't have the answer myself, but do people have views on that? How can we prevent the exclusion of a large part of the world's population from these new technologies?
Maybe.
Well,
No.
you want?
No.
No?
No.
Okay.
It's not my field, so.
Trying to include.
No, just going to say that from a public policy standpoint, the frameworks that we have, the government frameworks are not adapted for the pace, the celerity, and magnitude, the impact of emerging technologies coming at us, and AI being at the forefront. So that's one issue that we need to solve with new tools. Collective intelligence tools are absolutely necessary because we are all involved in this, and so there are some platforms that are emerging, and how we can have this discussion there. But yeah, you're right. This is a subject that is extremely important, but policymakers start to slowly wake up about it because people like us are ringing the alarm bell. And so I hope by 2030 we will have something solid, because we don't know at what pace and what impact AI would reach us, and we better be prepared for that.
Yes.
Well,
Bani, yeah.
As I mentioned a little in my previous remarks, was that it's the individuals that are using that technology that need to be given the discernment, especially young people. And this is a role, and the Interfaith Alliance for Safer Communities is engaging faith leaders in order to work with them to prevent some of the downsides of technology, including cyberbullying and sexual exploitation of children online. And I think it's for the social leaders and the religious leaders to to enhance the capacity of young people to use technology for their own well-being and not get obsessed with it, because someone talked about, perhaps Ambassador you did, about isolation, and that is a big danger, and not just a danger but a reality where young people are excluding themselves and just consuming technology 20 hours a day, etc. And I think there's a lot that could be done by leaders in society as well as those in education to give the youth and grown-ups the discernment of how to use the technology.
And I think thank you. I think we have a sweet window right now of adding this kind of self-regulation.
Yeah.
Because very quickly, if it goes on the way it is, which is rather unregulated, there will be regulation put upon.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes it's put upon by, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with governments putting it or anyone, but that it could be put on by people who are not necessarily big users, or don't understand the needs, or don't understand the kind of people that it's serving. So before that happens, let's really capture this moment. And especially because we're aware of the problems, we're aware of how vulnerable children are, we're aware that there are children. So, how would you want your child to be protected? That's exactly what we need to be doing right now. We don't need it to be stamped down to the point that our use of technology doesn't allow human progress, because let's face it, technology has also allowed incredible things to take place.
I love that you said that, because I think that's actually what I would hate is if we channeled the conversation all into that there's an overexposure to technology, and everybody in their head has, their children who are basically burning out when you take the iPad off them, and they freak out at you, and the conversation at the dinner table is terrible now because everybody's gone digital. If you've seen the thing on Amazon called The Feed, this is the world, it's all going digital, and communication will stop between interpersonal. So there is that thing. I think there is, I love what you're saying. I think the more that we can celebrate individual engagement in community, we have our artists and our book writers and our filmmakers celebrate the importance of that. I think that's one side to it. And I love the point that you're also making at the same time let's not bucket everything into technology in that thing, because there's a whole other conversation about the value that technology can deliver, which is emancipating many different vulnerable and underserved populations and giving them access to opportunity, a better life, or freedom from oppression, or even death. And I think that's just as important, and I think we need to enable people. So we did this fantastic work with the International Committee of the Red Cross, where we really got to understand their whole traceability program. And you see that all they're trying to do, and these people, they live for connecting families, and yet they're using paper. And with some simple addition of technology, it will bring families together in ways that are unimaginable to the people. And so there's an education there of the value that technology can bring to them. There are hundreds of millions of micro solutions that need to be deployed to make our world a better place for these vulnerable communities at the same time as this.
That's a very good note. And sorry, Debra.
I really like the point that you raised, because for me, like as a creator, I probably would have never had all the opportunities if it wasn't for technology. And I'm still born in Northern Europe, where I have a lot of chances. But what I actually absolutely love about the technology nowadays, and social media has played a huge part in that, is that nowadays you see people with so much talent from all over the world getting views and actually gaining attention for their art. And I think that's so incredible, and I really like that you raised that point, because so many people that would have never had the opportunity to be seen nowadays are seen, and it changes the conversation, and it also makes, you know, the world more diverse, because we see different types of art and we can all engage in that. So
that's a very positive vision of the potential of connectivity. This is perhaps a good point at which to bring in the audience. We'd love to hear your views on the kind of issues we've been discussing among ourselves. If you'd like to take the floor and put a question, please, yeah. And would you be good enough just to say who you are? And
So, firstly, I'd like to say, awesome panel, absolutely awesome. We're 2 feet away, and I feel that we're so connected. I don't even need a mobile phone to do that. Thank you very much.
Might need a microphone.
Well, a microphone, yeah.
Here you go.
So I'm with Athelos. We're a tech for dev company in the Netherlands. And really, our CEO, Martin, really woke up one morning and thought there's more to life, and went on the journey that you talked about, Simon. Purpose-driven leadership, meaningful impact, and we embraced the SDGs a year ago. Re-engineered the whole business to be SDGs and impact focused, and it's a hybrid. So it's the point you made, David, about being social but commercial as well. And I think we're somewhat successful. And for us, I think we feel that what you're talking about is effectively digital engagement and digital communication, whatever space that looks in. It truly has the power to empower and enable. So my question really is very simple. One word answer, based on your point, Mandeep, about your compass. What value would you align to the phrase digital communication? That's it.
Good. Let's take another couple, and then we'll. Anybody else like to take the floor? Yes, please.
Sarah L. from Bain & Company from the United States. We had a lot of discussion on values and the role of human-centered design and trying to address a lot of these issues, and it's a really important topic, and I'm really thrilled to be here. I'm just curious about the underpinning of the value and what role you think faith plays in that, or spirituality, or you know, what do we need as a society to get the necessary values to make progress on this issue?
Yeah. I might take one more, and then we'll go back to the panel. Yes, please.
Hi there, my name is Mo Harvey. I work in fintech out in Asia. Just one point in terms of tech and faith and compassion that I'm seeing, particularly out in Asia, is the world of microfinance and tech enabling and democratizing finance. Specifically in Asia, where it's the largest growing middle class, you have tech which is enabling about 20% of the world's poor to access finance at the moment. What this is also meaning is that you're seeing communities engaged, you're seeing women in areas that were traditionally underserved or not respected, being able to gain a voice, gain an income. And I think that this is something that, yes, most of the microfinance institutions globally are for profit, but I think that there's a real underpinning of compassion that's driving most of those. And so from a venture point of view, they become an utterly investable organisation and company, which traditionally banks haven't been lending to, which is ironic, as they are just seen as competitors. But I think it's one of the most exciting and interesting areas is microfinance globally, because imagine what that can do and what you can build when you are democratizing and enabling people to gain an income. And the mobile phone is at the absolute forefront of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I hear various initiatives in that direction. Would any of the panel like to come back on the three aspects of value that we've, please?
So to answer your question, I would say that the one word that I put at the forefront would be empathy. So beyond compassion, empathy is the ability to put in oneself's shoes, you know, and when you create AI systems that are trying to act as human or, you know, create artificial intimacy, how do we make sure that, you know, again, human values are being embedded? So I think working towards empathy is essential there.
Yeah.
Debra?
Anyone else?
I don't know. I have to think about it.
I would say unity, because there's a great potential for technology to unify the world, but there's also the danger of creating divisions, both class divisions, but also divisions of cultures across the world, because, sorry, that's more than one word. I should.
Mandy?
I would have said, I mean, quite simply put, it really is allowing connectivity and us to connect with one another. Sorry, you asked the question. But it enables unity and diversity and the fact that more people have a say. I mean, I remember a time when people would only consume Hollywood and Bollywood, and it's so great that now there are so many different forms of media out there, and they're, you know, everyone's watching some form or another, including us on YouTube right now. This conversation otherwise wouldn't really get very far. So this idea of connectivity is really a key value. But to your point about the spiritual and faith, especially given where we're sitting and the kind hosts that have enabled this conversation, I think that it's with the demise of classical religion or faith that we've even had to think about what are our values and how do we bring that to the forefront. Because before, we were kind of anchored with the faith that we would be part of or the community we'd be part of. And now, who is our community? Is it more a kind of a global cyber community? In fact, it's probably the people that you're WhatsApping and the people that you're Facebooking and the people, they're actually the community that you actually interact with more than perhaps your neighbor or the community that you live in. So given that community has changed and faith, or at least religion and kind of the role that religion is playing in society has changed, I think faith and having that sense of unity and the sense of human values is even more important, and why that question is so important. So thank you.
Andrew, could I invite, I'll come back to Debra in a moment. Can I just ask Bani then, because I very much relate to what you were saying, Mandeep, about how it's a different kind of community that we're now part of, not necessarily a traditional faith community, but what is the role of traditional faith communities, Bani, if I may ask you, since you're a member of the Interfaith Alliance? I mean, at the same time, I can see that there is the power of promoting messages about our common humanity, the need for human dignity. But do you relate? How do you relate to what Mandeep just said?
Oh, very much. And also speaking to that lady, it is about
Sarah, yeah.
inclusivity. Sorry, Sarah. It is about promoting inclusivity. And faith has the power to unite. And that is what is the purpose of religion, one would say, is to unite humanity and bring out the best and to be inclusive. And so it's the inclusivity that faith can remind the tech companies, because we can't be creating this technology in a vacuum, but it has to be inclusive of everybody, all the users, and their needs.
Debra, you want to go in?
I think it was a bit more about community than faith, but if I look at the platform that I've created, I think the community is very important to a lot of people, and the stories that I write, they always evolve around a certain topic. And for example, if the topic would surround, for example, about mental health and someone that has gone through severe depression, it opens up a topic, and under that post, under that picture, you see there's a conversation and there's a lot of sharing. And I think before, a lot of people maybe would search for their offline communities, which I'm not opposed to. But I think for a lot of people who maybe feel suffocated in their own community or don't feel that they can be themselves, I think these types of platforms are really, really helpful, and they get a lot of support out of that, and I think that's something that's very new.
Mark?
I think the word, just to pick up the question here, for me is trust, because sometimes we speak about technology or startups that then scale, and there's an assumption that they will just automatically gain global domination, like some of the platforms that we've seen. But this never happens unless, as Simon mentioned again, putting the person or customer at the center, but listening and being incredibly aware of the importance of how the technology is being presented. Because if people don't trust it, they will just, like ships in the night, they will disappear, and the platform will never scale. And the question here from Mo regarding technology in Southeast Asia, I mean, the forerunner of all micro value transfer was M-Pesa, and it's probably about 20 years ago. But it hasn't scaled until now, and in some ways it was ahead of its time. But it exploited and used and benefited from the technology that was available ubiquitously within Kenya, and it was also supported by a regulatory regime that acknowledged that the mobile phone companies were more trusted than the financial institutions. The platforms now in Southeast Asia, such as GoCheck, such as Grab, such as Kareem in the Gulf, they have acknowledged that not everybody has debit and credit cards. So accessibility and being able to connect to these platforms in a simple way by the driver accepting cash has been transformative in creating a platform that creates scale and that's trusted. More than one word.
And
Please, Simon.
I just wanted, because I love, by the way, I'm number 2 on trust. I think trust is it. Certainly from our perspective, we have 4 values in the company, and trust is the number 1 and has been since the company was founded. Because trust, it includes inclusivity, it includes responsibility, accountability, transparency, and it's about empowerment as well. So I think that word trust is really, really powerful. I think that's our kind of partial answer to the faith question. I love the question about the fintech revolution. It's something we've been very much part of. And I think you nailed it in your commentary there. I think Grameen and M-Pesa and all these, I think they uncovered a lot about the true realities of the communities that they were serving, and they served the realities of the community. And in many cases, that meant serving the women in the community who were much better with money than the men.
Yep.
And I love that, how technology empowered, back to that word, empowered the community in the right way.
Absolutely, yeah. Any other questions, comments? Yes, please. There's one anyway.
Hi, I'm in emotional intelligence and the arts, and I have a question I've been struggling with myself. When we speak about education and children, where do you think we should draw the line between regulation and freedom of speech? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes complete sense, yeah. Would anyone like to tackle that?
Yeah, I
Bani?
think it's a really important question. A few months ago, the Interfaith Alliance held an event along with the Vatican, the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences. And they had invited a lot of the tech companies, some of them in the room as well, I think. and faith leaders and those working in policy. And this question came up, and a lot of the tech companies were hiding behind the question of freedom of speech and expression. And while that's really important, and I work in the area of human rights, and I would be the first to say it's really important to safeguard freedom of expression, especially by some governments and other actors that would want to regulate speech in their countries by using, governance of technology as an excuse. When it comes to children, we have to safeguard the children first. There's absolutely no question that children should be prey to, people's lower nature, just using the excuse of freedom of expression. So I think there's absolutely no question that when it comes to children, we have got to censor the exposure that they might be facing.
Would anyone else like to reply to that?
Certainly, I think from our perspective, Salesforce is we kind of think that there should be maybe more regulation in certain areas. I think your points are good. And I think that we've got a lot of people who are using very powerful technology without necessarily fully understanding the implications of it. And this is an area where we need to be really thoughtful, and technology is for the good of society.
Please.
Thank you. My name is Dominic Register. I work with an organisation called Salzburg Global Seminar, and I also work with a new initiative called Karanga, which is a global alliance promoting social emotional learning and life skills. A number of the panels talked about the role of education, or the role education can play in helping young people grow up with the kind of values that will let them positively engage with technology later on in life. And I wondered if there were specific examples of education systems or education programs that the panel had come across, either from a faith-based perspective or from a secular perspective, that you felt were really delivering on this at the moment.
Please, Mandeep.
I've seen in Britain, and I can point to some specific schools in Britain, for example, both faith schools, top public schools, and top state schools, where they have put values at the forefront. So good education or a good academics is a given, I think, for a good school. The use of technology, well, it is actually brought in from kindergarten. Like, children are taught, not even taught because it's so intuitive as to how they use the iPad, but they're encouraged to do their homework, to do, it's really hard to kind of regulate their use of technology when it's actually inbuilt in schools. And so the only thing that's actually anchoring those children is the emphasis on values. So, for example, the schools that I've been working with, they choose 5 values, such as teamwork, or compassion, or fairness, or kindness. And so everything they do, whether it's with technology, whether it's the way they use technology between themselves, because technology is not only being used for homework, believe me, or the way they're, conducting themselves, it's being assessed and praised according to how they build on these values. So I'll give you an example. When a rugby match is played, either virtually or physically, the praise will be going to the child who passed the ball, who looked after their other members of the team, who actually thought, oh, I'm not just the winner, I'm not just the loser, what mattered more was how I engaged with the team. It's a game changer, because it means that you're bringing up children, the kind of children that you would want to be our future leaders. And so I think actually it all starts with education. We wouldn't be having this conversation if our education was based on those values, because then our technology would naturally be based on those values, and our communities would be working from those values. And our communities are so much revolving around education and school, because that's the one community that you actually are part of until the age of 18 at least, or 16. So I think it's fundamental.
Bani?
So the Baha'i international community in about 184 countries has a program called the Junior Youth Empowerment Program. And it's working with junior youth between the ages of 10 and 14, because at 10, they're no longer children. Parents tend to take care of their children and somehow forget that age group, where really a child is coming to understand his or her identity and role in life. And the idea is, and it's not about teaching religion, it's about teaching values, similar to what Mandeep was mentioning, but really about service to the community. What role can that group of children play in making a contribution to their society, so that they can understand what their role is quite early on. And along with it comes discernment about what is right and what is not, and how they can use technology for the good of the whole, rather than just indulge in video games all day, or, you know, some sort of, even if it's reading about, you know, some particular program for their own selves, but rather how can they use this to give back to society. So that's what that program is, and it's.
Cyrus.
So beyond children, what is encouraging what we see right now, there is a trend when you learn AI or machine learning at university, you don't only do that, but you also learn about ethics. So these classes are being taught globally. And what's even more encouraging is like what Salesforce is doing internally, you know, having this ethics discussion in-house also. So education doesn't stop, you know, after you're grown up, but it continues thing. And the discussion on ethics is more and more common practice now.
Simon.
So on the education stuff, so before the technology piece, I've been blown away. It's a personal statement here. The Maria Montessori education system is kind of mind-blowing. How they've, and she kind of got it right so long ago. And I think there's a lot there that without, you know, pushing specific values, and they have them, it was really an eye-opening approach to going back to basics and the education system there. So I really recommend looking at that. I would point you to trailhead.com. So we just personally, as a company, invested because we really believe in education. It is this the playing field leveler, and how do you get all these people who have no access, who are veterans, who are unemployed, who are unskilled, to access this digital opportunity of this economy of trillions of dollars. So we've made education free on our behalf, and we're not going to solve the whole problem, but there are 12 million people already on that. It's free, go there, it's gamified. You can become a technologist starting from scratch. You can learn about AI and join Cyrus. I mean, this is really important, and I think there are other companies who are doing the same thing, but it's that free education that is world-class. Arizona State University in the US has done something really interesting. They've looked at education and they've said, we don't believe in the way education is being rolled out. It's an exclusive education system. How do we make an inclusive education system? And how do we allow everybody to be able to put their credentials in a verifiable way? And so they created a blockchain-based view of your personal education, and that's now shareable across anywhere. The whole idea being to make education exclusive, and on the back of that, they've been investing in these centers of excellence, they're calling them, around the world, to kind of deliver Thunderbird school education. So typically a very exclusive education to people who would not normally have access to it. We need more of that.
We do need.
Any,
I think this is a very interesting question, earlier there, regarding, I guess, if I'm interpreting the question as I heard it, which was, there's a proliferation of material which is going to be widely available, both for children and also for adults. But in the case of children, and again, as a personal statement, as a father of 4 children, the conversation which the parents have with the children is very often, if you like, one that doesn't happen, because so much of that engagement is done silently, where they're engaging in, and it could be pretty, easy and could be pretty non-threatening. It could be Snapchat, it could be TikTok, it could be, something that's non-threatening, but we don't know what else is going on there. And we are not educated, if you like, we're not equipped is a better way to express it, with the tools to have that conversation, nor are they, if you like, receiving the kind of messaging and content which will enable them to evaluate more discernibly what is, objective and what is real, because that line, and I think the big threat is is the grain of line between what is presented as being reality to what actually is reality. And I for one, believe that if something is determined and proven to be inaccurate, absolutely false, the platform should be compelled to take it down. I don't think that it is right that they're able to hide behind this position of freedom of speech.
Yeah, very
Can
much
I
agree.
add something to that?
Please, Debra.
Because I like the comparison that you made between what is real and what's reality and what's not reality. I was working in the Netherlands for a while in a program where we were teaching children, young children, about diversity within society. And there were different peer educators. We would all stand in front of the class, and there were peer educators from different backgrounds, Muslim, Jewish, homosexual. And I think this was a really powerful tool as well, and also to teach children to become critical thinkers. And also because a lot of the news that children receive, it's either through their parents or through the news that they got. And I think by having peer education, it's actually a very powerful tool, and it's actually becoming very popular in the Netherlands. So,
yeah. Are there any further questions, comments from the audience? Otherwise, our time has come to an end, and I'd like to thank the panel warmly for fantastic interventions. I won't attempt to summarize them, but for me it was extremely rich and thought-provoking discussion. I'd like to thank our equally, what was the phrase you used, equally awesome audience for fantastic questions and input. So thank you very much. I think we're allowed to stay on. And a final word of thanks to Interfaith Alliance for hosting us here in what must be the most relaxed setting in Davos. I've never come across anything quite as sort of serene and intimate, but it's wonderful, and thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
And David, thank you for moderating and for the SDGs.
Thanks for conceiving of this.
Oh yeah, should we get one picture?
Okay.
Yes.
you.